This video is a quick look at the major biogeochemical cycles. Bio meaning life, geo meaning earth, and chemical meaning chemical. So these are chemicals on the earth that affect or support life. They're all cycles because the parts get reused. The carbon molecules, the nitrogen molecules, the sulfur, the phosphorus that are here now are the same ones, more or less, that have been here for billions of years. So for the carbon cycle, there are rapid and slow aspects to it. Rapid means it's happening kind of in a lifetime. Things like photosynthesis and cellular respiration fit into there. And combustion, burning of wood or burning of fossil fuels or any other carbohydrate would fit into the rapid cycling. Usually it's solid forms of carbon going into the atmosphere and vice versa. For slow parts of the cycle, these ones happen over a really long time, maybe 1,000 years, maybe 1,000,000 years. And this can include processes like the creation of fossils or the creation of fossil fuels like oil, coal, natural gas. Carbon dioxide being dissolved into the ocean, that's our biggest sink of carbon, our biggest storage place for carbon. Rocks like limestone, very high in carbon, and things like methane hydrates. So methane stored underneath kind of a shield of ice. Another set of terms we need to know for the carbon cycles are sources versus sinks. A source releases carbon out, usually in the form of CO2, sometimes CO, sometimes CH4. All of these, though, as gases. So out into the atmosphere, that's a source. If it's going into the atmosphere, it's a source. So if you're burning wood, you're burning oil, you are breathing out CO2. Those are all increasing the atmospheric levels of CO2 or carbon anyway. So those would be sources. A carbon sink is the opposite. You have something that was in the atmosphere and it's becoming usually a solid. So photosynthesis is a good example of something going into a sink. Carbon in the atmosphere being transformed into something like glucose. So carbon sinks are things like the forests or the oceans or limestone or fossil fuels or things like peat bogs, places where high carbon content items are often left alone for a really long time. The transition between source and sink is usually an indication that we're going from a slow part of the cycle into a rapid part. For the nitrogen cycle, there are a few terms that sound similar, but we know that we have atmospheric nitrogen that is not usable by us or by plants. And in order to make it something usable, we use nitrates. We need to do a couple of processes. The first one is nitrogen fixation. We use nitrogen fixing bacteria, or they do it on their own, to take N2 and turn it into NH4, so the ammonium ion. That process is nitrogen fixation. Bacteria do that. Once that happens, then the ammonium ion will be, or can be, created or changed into nitrites or nitrates, so NO2 or NO3 ions. And that process, starting with ammonium and ending with nitrates, is called nitrification. Nitrification is great news for us because it gets us our most desired and useful form of nitrogen, which is the nitrate ion. If somebody wanted to undo all of this process, which lots of bacteria do want to undo, they would be called denitrifying bacteria. The process is denitrification, which is the undoing of the work of nitrogen fixation or nitrification. So bacteria are important for all of these steps. For the sulfur cycle, we have to remember that inorganic sulfur, just like inorganic nitrogen, is not usable by living things, or at least most living things, but some bacteria specialize in it. So some bacteria can take those inorganic forms of sulfur and turn them into sulfates. The SO4 ion is our ion of choice when we want to get sulfur into our bodies, or when plants want to take it in through their roots too. Once it's in that form, it's used by plants, animals, decomposers back into the soil, more plants, animals, decomposers back into the soil, more plants, animals, decomposers, over and over. The risk of this is sulfur components in the atmosphere, especially sulfates in the atmosphere, can mix with water. There's lots of water in the air and form sulfuric acid. And if that rains back down or snows back down or hails or whatever, precipitation in any form, that will acidify the soil or the water that it lands on. So acid rain or acid precipitation is the issue there. For the phosphorus cycle, this is the simplest of the cycles. We have phosphates, so phosphate ions that just erode, dissolve in water, get absorbed into plant roots. Things eat the plants, return the phosphates back to the soil eventually through decomposers, and repeat, repeat, repeat. Sometimes we form new rocks, sometimes those rocks get eroded, but the general idea is that phosphorus has a very simple cycle, and none of it takes place in the air. It's all just phosphates in water or phosphates in living things. And this is the one we used as the example for the issue of eutrophication, where we said that a formerly limiting reagent or formerly limiting nutrient that is suddenly increased in concentration can lead to sudden growth. And that sudden growth example we talked about in class was the sudden growth of algae, which can create shade in the water, which can cause deoxygenation, can cause the lack of oxygen of the water. So what seems like a good thing, phosphorus that the algae can use, turns into something that can possibly kill an entire lake. The last of our cycles here, the water cycle, or sometimes we call it the hydrologic cycle, is the one with the most familiar terms like evaporation and condensation and transpiration and precipitation, runoff. I think we know these ones. And the important thing to know about water is all of the ways that water is unique. Water is really good at holding heat. Water is polar, which is the source of most of these weird bits. Water is really good at sticking to itself and creating like surface tension through hydrogen bonds. Water is really good at sticking to other things like the walls of the xylem in a plant. So it helps it crawl up into the leaves where it's needed. And a really weird one is that water is most dense at 4 degrees Celsius, which makes ice float. And also, we talked in class why that's so weird that ice floats, but so nice for life. And also leads to a lot of opportunities for convection in lakes, rivers, ponds, and oceans that mixes nutrients up from the bottom and provides access to them for everything that's living in the water. So that was a quick look at our different biogeochemical cycles.